was that the appetite for doing something more strict in that area is not there. I think that we haven't gotten to a situation in which the international community is thoroughly sensitized to the extent of this problem. And this is even more, it's even worse because this really has an impact on food security, particularly on those commodities that have very thin markets. And it's not by accident that the FAO has stressed the situation of rice, in which, I mean, a ban by small exporters have had huge repercussions, and it's because only 6% of the entire rice production is traded abroad. So any decision by affecting the trade in the stocks of rice will have amplified repercussions in terms of international prices and with very dire consequences for the poorest developing countries. So this is a matter that we have to look in very great detail. Of course, I mean, an additional point is that any sort of export ban is very bad for those countries that resort to that. And I would recall one event that has clearly affected the position of my country as an international provider, which was the fact that in the early 1970s, there was an export ban by the US on soybeans, with repercussions that have basically consolidate my country as one of the largest exporters, and I think that they still regret that very much. So I think that those that resort to those sorts of policies, they should be made aware that this may actually rule them out from the international market. In relation to the questions that have been put to the panel, the first one, the support system that are sustainable while maintaining an open trading system. I think that the response was already shared with you, is that the mechanisms that already exist, the provisions under the green box, particularly in the areas of general services, infrastructure, rural extension, agriculture research, are the ones that are the soundest policies. They are non-distorting, they have an impact on the livelihood of farmers. It allows them to be prepared to avail themselves for this international context of higher international prices. This was the way that my country has followed for quite some time, with the results that we all know. Other areas in which also the green box are very important: the insurance systems, environmental payments. Those are also elements that are essential to build up a sustainable agriculture. We have some measure of distorting payments for seeds, and I would be very interested on the views of the FAO on fertilizers. I think that this is something that we have to look into that. Clearly, the fact that we have high energy prices and would certainly lead the fertilizing industry to actually pocket the additional subsidies that are paid to farmers. Is it feasible for the WTO to incorporate UN conventions? Well, I think that we have to first put the main responsibility on member states to ensure that they comply domestically with UN recommendations and objectives, being aware that most of the UN recommendations are indeed not legally binding. One of the things that we have done in Brazil, which is very important, is that we have enshrined in our constitution via an amendment the notion of food security. So I think that this is something that members could very well do, and this will actually ensure coherence where it matters the most, which is domestic. Another point that is worth having into account is that there is a certain, let us say, fear that the fact that the WTO has a dispute settlement system would lead, would put developing countries in a harm's way if their programs or measures are challenged in this WTO system. And I think that experience shows that very rarely WTO members would resort to dispute settlement against legitimate objectives that are unrelated to trade. But of course we have to be on guard also of the fact that there is a kind of iron law of protectionism, that is, every legitimate objective, if it can be used in a protectionist way, it will so be. So that's a point that we have to have in mind. Regarding the contribution by the G20 and G8 and the G20 summits to global policy coherence and more equitable world trading system, I think that the approach followed by the distinguished permanent representative of France is the correct one. I mean, it's up to those groups to provide the impulse for things to be to move forward in terms of the international system. Of course, the fact that we are moving from a G8 structure to a G20, it adds to the legitimacy because you bring on the perspective of a larger number of developing countries, which still comprise the majority of men.